A very good morning to you. Thank you for making time to watch KBC Channel 1. You are just in time for Biz Check this morning. And my name is Betty Kiptum, and Lensa Odingo is my colleague on the sign language interpretation. Now, over the next 2 hours, we shall be having quite some candid discussions. One conversation is on genetically modified foods that were banned in Kenya at some point, and now it's opening up. We shall be talking about this with the Professor Richard Oduor. He's a research director at Kenyatta University. He's with me already in studio. In the second hour, we shall be talking about business process outsourcing, just what is happening in the IT industry and how are businesses outsourcing their IT processes. That will be having that conversation with Vinay Subaramaya. He's the BPO director at Technobrain. But first, our conversation on matters GMO with Professor Richard Oduor from Kenyatta University. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Betty.
Kindly give us an overview of how the GMO industry is doing in Kenya.
Thank you so much. I think it's doing pretty well now. We are at a point where we have already approvals to undergo or undertake commercial cultivation of GMO cotton. We also at a point where the country is only waiting for a cabinet approval so that the BT maize, which is also GMO maize, to again move to the next crucial stage of commercialization. We're also at a good place because we have cassava that has already been approved to undergo open cultivation, and this is cassava that is tolerant to or resistant to what we are calling cassava brown stick disease, and this therefore means that those are the top 3 runners of GM crops that are actually out here at a good level. So soon we will be having BT cotton out there because it has gone through all the requirements.
Right. Before we even get into the now and the future, let's take it back a little bit.
Yes.
That ban, I mean, since November 2012, you could not import or grow genetically modified foods or any other material in Kenya. What necessitated this ban, and what did it take for it to be lifted?
Well, you've asked 2 questions really in one. What necessitated the ban was some naive paper, and allow me to use the word naive, by a French scholar called Seralini. And that paper was published in 2012, and it was claiming that some rats that were exposed to a particular GMO maize developed cancer, and it was published. Then it emerged later that indeed it never went through the right process. The data was flawed. One was the choice of the rats they use, and I'm using rats here just for, that's not what we call it in the labs, but for the purpose of breaking it down. Okay. Allow me just to call it rats, right. But we usually call them mice and many others. But for simplistic purposes, allow me just to call them rats or mice, but they are different. But the whole idea here is that the mice that were used to be fed by those GM maize, as claimed, were already predisposed to tumor. What it means is that when you want to do, say, research in cancer, you use a particular sort of model animal that you have already predisposed to tumors, so that when you are testing your new drug on it, you see what it does to it. So they are already, actually, this particular mice, even if they were fed on water, they will still develop tumor. That is what it means. So feeding it with GM maize and then seeing some tumor and then attributing it to the GM maize was flawed. And many others in terms of even the size of the tumor, because there are ways on which with which you should use to handle animals in the lab. There are a lot more of regulations around this. But if you look at the sizes of even the tumor that were actually published, they were bigger than the normal sizes that are recommended. So, and many other, the sizing. So there are lots of problems that were with that paper. And later on, the paper was retracted. And in science, if your paper is retracted from the journal that actually published it, it's an embarrassment to scholarship and science. That happened still. Later on, actually, it was so bad that even another journal published it again for purposes of keeping it, archiving it, so that people should know how not to do bad research.
Okay.
This paper, when it got here in 2012, it led to pronunciation of a ban. And unfortunately, it wasn't. It was just an executive, order. It wasn't really a decision as such. But we picked it. We are still at it. Up to now, it has not been lifted. What has happened is that the government, in the bid to facilitate and enhance the Big Four agenda implementation, particularly on manufacturing, textile is one of the big areas for manufacturing, and therefore the raw material for the textile industry is actually cotton. And that was very critical that it was accelerated, and now it has been approved. The ban is still there, which we want lifted, and probably given time we will discuss on what it's doing now to the country with its existence.
Right.
Yeah.
So the cotton was allowed, and then now we have cassava that is already moving into, you said field production?
Yeah, well, open cultivation, and we also have BT maize, which has gone through all the open cultivation and is only waiting for a bit of cabinet decision on it, and it will advance to the last stage before it then gets commercialized.
What is the benefit of having GMO technology? Say, even if when the ban is lifted, we hope that it's lifted one day. When it is lifted, what will it be? What will be the benefit to the Kenyan economy? Let's start there.
It's interesting right now. You see, the ban is in importation, but now, and this is the tricky bit, Betty, if the ban is on importation, and now we have already approved commercialization of those ones that are already here, then in essence, really, we don't have the ban. But I don't want to go into that, because we are happy with the little that so far we've got, that we can have it at least commercialized in the country. The benefits are huge, and sometimes I'm surprised, because I make GMO myself. I'm a molecular biologist, so I cut, clone, do this genome, genetic manipulations on other crops, including maize for drought tolerance, which probably we'll talk about also later. And therefore, it's a technology that I have engaged with for several years. If just to even take you back to how have we then used this very, very technology in medical field. You see, any person who you can see out there who is diabetic is actually enjoying GMO insulin. There is no any non-GMO insulin world over as it is. And why was this big? It was big because before, Betty, if you're diabetic, what would we do? We would try to purify some insulin from somebody and see whether we can inject you with it.
Okay.
And then that became very impossible. Then we went to pigs, and therefore we would purify a bit of insulin from pigs. But imagine what that would do to a Muslim. He would rather die with that your insulin from the pig. He wouldn't touch it, right? Then we looked back and said, look, why are we struggling? If you are not diabetic, it means your insulin is right. And therefore there is a gene in your body that is actually facilitating the production of this correct insulin that you have. Then instead of wasting time, we just go into your genome, just ask you to open your mouth, we just take a small little swab. That's enough to extract the DNA. Then from that we will identify that particular section of the gene that produces insulin. That is what we clone and then express it in bacteria, E. coli, by the way. Then tag something into that particular expression cassette in our language so that it is expressed outside the cell. Then as the bacteria is just growing in the broth, in the liquid media, it's also excreting insulin. Then you just purify, you bulk that, and you have your insulin. That is a recombinant DNA technology. Doctors are prescribing insulin. Nobody is complaining. I want them to be on the street. Nobody's saying this. So we keep wondering, how come if the same technology, we are using it for crop improvement so that we become food secure, it's a big deal. So is it therefore trendy for people to die out of hunger but not out of disease? Because that's exactly what I'm beginning to feel. I'm even thinking that it's better really to be food secure so that we are able not to be exposed to a lot more diseases. That's just one example. We have the recent vaccine for COVID. That is RNA technology, where you have identified the core proteins within the virus, and that is what you're using to trigger the body to produce antibodies. That is what we saw, and everybody took it. We were never on street. So, and it's the same thing. So when we bring it now to food security, because the whole idea is this, Betty, we have maize, for example, that you take it out there, it will be chewed up by all these insects. And we are saying these insects are not our relatives. They are good in terms of the food web and food chain and all that for the environment and diversity. But when you are going to die because your maize has been eaten by fall armyworm, all of it cleared. What do you do then? You come and say, there must be something in this world that kills fall armyworm. So what we do is that thing is what we identify. If it is produced by anything living, and many of them are, we identify the gene that produces that thing that kills fall armyworm. We bring it into maize and express it onto the leaves and everywhere else. We can actually even choose not to express it on the kernels that we eat, because we understand it's all sequenced. So when you make such an insect tolerant maize, for example, how bad can that get? And you see, when sometimes people argue, they seem as if these things are coming from the West. This lab I'm talking about that I've been heading, and I'm the Director of Research Support at KU, really is here at Kenyatta University since 2005. That is 17 years we've been doing this cloning and cutting and putting this thing here in this country by Kenyans, by many of us. So at this point in time, I'm not surprised as an individual. And as a, if you ask me, we have a lot more benefit, because look at the economic gain that comes from it. And probably given more time, we will talk about it. South Africa adopted GMO in 1998. 1998 to date, if our mathematics could be correct, we are almost talking about 24 years of the planting, cultivation, commercialization of these GM crops. It was cotton, it is soybean, it is BT maize. They're already existing there. I was at the University of Kiptum for my PhD. Really, we enjoyed all these things, and we are here still. And that has taken years, over 10, 15 years, So the whole idea is, and let me surprise you, Betty, when you look at the economics from 1998 to 2018, that was 10 years, right? South Africa benefited $2 billion USD and 237 million USD in the year 2018 alone. Look at that kind of economic benefit that can come from this. And apart from that, other countries are now on it, and probably we'll discuss about that a little further. Speaking
of other countries,
yes.
The US, they are thinking of renewing their AGOA agreement, that gives preferential trade to countries such as Kenya.
Yeah.
And they were complaining just in April that this ban on GMO imports for Kenya, that is affecting that kind of agreement or even the trade that we have. So why is the government taking so long to lift this ban? If, as you say, the paper was flawed, that necessitated the ban in the first place. The paper was flawed, and here is trade even being impacted with other countries. Why is the government taking so long?
Several reasons come into mind when you ask such a question. Because what's funny is that while we were banning in 2012, Sudan approved. And for the last 10 years, this is 2022, that's 10 years of ban. And the reason was that about cancer. Now the question here is, and just you ask yourself basic questions, Betty. If for the last 10 years there has been a ban on importation and consumption of GMO in this country, for the last 10 years, then, if the reason was cancer, have you heard of cases of cancer in this country for the last 10 years? You know, because if it was the source of cancer, then for the last 10 years, when we have total ban, we shouldn't be talking about cancer. So the reason for which it was banned actually is flawed. Cancer has been here even before. There are kids who are born, you know, who have not even eaten any GM and they are cancerous. And because I have interest in cancer research, which I'm currently undertaking on other reasons that we could be having cancer, including exposure to ionizing radiation in the environment, we are trivializing the fight against, against cancer. But that could be a discussion for another day. Part of the reason why I think the government had not actually lifted the ban, which right now I would say they have 50% or 70% lifted, because they have commercialized, approved the commercialization of BT cotton anyway. Only that the importation bit is where there's still a small little challenge, and we're still hoping they will lift it absolutely soon. Could be one, would be the fact that yes, there was panic, and probably there was no also a lot of consultation, because I wish we were consulted, because we would have given them the real reasons why that ban is really affecting this country. And also probably sometimes as a government, if these things happen, you have heard of situations even in this country where if something happens, for example, there have been even road accidents, you see a ban on probably night travels and all that, but after some time they lift. And we say if that paper was out and there was panic, as a government, probably the right thing to do is first of all stop it quickly and just think through it. But we are saying if that was a good thing, it's fine. But 10 years of restructuring is where we have a problem. Why has it taken you 10 years, really? It was good for the government to say, hey, we are seeing this paper, scientists, what are you guys saying? Because whoever banned it was not a scientist, really. We were here, I wasn't consulted. And I work for Kenyatta University, it's a public university, I'm paid salary by the government. You would imagine that our national academies would have been consulted, and even key stakeholders. I wasn't. And that was the only lab in this, in East and Central Africa, in the universities that can do cloning. Now we only have 2 in the universities. One is here, and then another one is Masinde Muliro, that was approved just recently. Okay, for a long time, this has been happening here at Kenyatta University. My thinking is the government panicked. And probably if you hear that this thing is causing cancer, and everybody's scared of this cancer, which means probably we give more funding to cancer and leave GMO alone, because it's not what they think it is. But also to say something else is that our regulatory agencies also probably needed to come out very strongly. That time they were a bit slow, but they realized later on that this thing is not really correct, and also firmed up, because if a government banned importation and consumption of GMO, Betty, and never banned National Biosafety Authority, which is the organization that is mandated to regulate GMO. So what exactly? Because why were we still having National Biosafety Authority to regulate GMO when you have banned it? When you ban something, you don't regulate. And that is why we don't have Cocaine Regulatory Authority, because it is banned. It is banned, yes. Yeah, you get. So that was just double standard, and I think it was all panic. It is time that we need to absolutely lift this ban, because the benefits are huge. The benefits are huge. They are.
Well, of course, we hope that happens. We are having a conversation on matters GMO in Kenya, and we are talking with Professor Richard Oduor. He's a research director at Kenyatta University. This conversation continues in a bit, but here in studio, we get back to our conversation on matters GMOs, and we are talking with Professor Richard Oduor, a research director at Kenyatta University. Thank you for staying with us, Professor.
Thank you so much.
before we even just get into the details of this GMO, could you break down what GMO exactly is for Kenyans to actually understand what it entails?
Thank you, Betty, for that question again. You see, when you talk about genetically modified organism, you are actually saying that you have this organism that has received DNA from another organism that naturally it couldn't have, that cannot allow natural mating. And that's the basic way of explaining it. For instance, Betty, when you are eating githeri, largely it has beans and maize, and probably Irish, potato. But let's stick with just beans and maize. So when you are crushing those two in your mouth, you are mixing DNA. You are mixing DNA. And why are you having beans in there? Because you want the proteins that beans have. And maize will give you the carbohydrates that you require. You probably can put a bit of salt in it to give you a bit of minerals, and put some oil in it to give you a bit of fats. All that makes a nutritious food. But we keep mixing these things because our bodies require these biomolecules. Now, if it happens that now there is fall armyworm that is eating all the beans, and they are not able to now grow naturally, you see, but you still require the proteins that are in the beans. So what do I do as a genetic engineer? I look at the genome of beans. We don't eat beans because we like the color. It's because we want the proteins that are in there, right? And for that reason, luckily, we are able to sequence the genome of most of these crops. It's all sequenced. Like in your body, you have 3.2 billion nucleotides. And it's all sequenced human beings. So we know what is where, what's responsible for your hair, what's responsible for your skin color, all these things, we already have them. Now, if I have already sequenced beans, for instance, now I have my maize, which is not affected by the natural calamities, but the beans are affected. What I do is that I sequence the entire genome of beans and say, what are the set of genes that are responsible to produce for the production of proteins? And they are there, and we know them. You cut that nicely and clone it into the genome of maize, because maize is also sequenced. You place it in the genome somewhere. When you do that, and even target it so that that protein is on the kernels, because you don't want it on the roots, because we don't eat the roots. We don't want it on the leaves. It could be on the leaves because for our cows and everything else, it could still be fine. We can actually choose to be fair to everyone, at cows and ourselves, and put it in all the system so that the roots can get a bit of it, and so that the nematodes that are down there can also enjoy. But the idea is, now we will have maize that has both the proteins and the carbohydrates that it was originally actually having. If you have such maize, will it really be bad? Because you naturally actually eat beans, and there's nothing different that we have done. So when you talk about it, at that point, that maize will be called genetically modified maize, because naturally you cannot cross beans and maize. It can't happen. And that is where now the gene, the advantage of this technology, that we have now gone beyond the barriers of the species, that human beings were supposed only to compare notes with fellow human beings to get a baby. But if you feel that your interest is to have probably soft hair that is in the, in the horses, then you cannot compare notes. It won't give you any offspring. But if the hair is what you want, we just go to the horses and say, this particular person wants this. And there must be a reason why we do this. We just don't go there to pick these proteins because of the fun of it. There must be genuine reason. We will have tried all the ways to still get our beans to grow without moving the genes. But also something else that is very important, because somebody out there would look at it and say, wow, that is interesting, but what would happen? What are the fears?
Yes, is it safe? That's what they're asking
the safety.
themselves.
So was it unsafe when you were eating it together? You know, it's the same proteins.
Well, it's produced naturally, so we trust Mother Nature.
It's also natural because it's the maize that has also produced it. It's not being synthesized in the lab. It's still gone back to a plant. Maize is a plant and whatever. So the whole idea is, and your question is to ask, now how do you screen that it's the correct thing? When we move this gene to the genome of maize, we also sequence and get to know where exactly is this gene, because it can go and insert itself in the place which give the maize probably the green color. So you find maize becomes black. It is nutritious but now black. That has a lot of effects, and that is why it takes almost 15 years to get a genetically modified crop to be commercialized. And even after that, you can't do that thing in just ordinary lab. That lab at Kenyatta University and also in Il Rebecca and also now in the Masinde Muliro, that lab and Kalro, there are only 4 now in the country. Those labs are tightly regulated by National Biosafety Authority. And the people who actually handle this must be also qualified. And even us, we are also Kenyans. We also want to live in this country. We are not here to kill the entire humanity, you know. So we are also tightly regulated. And globally, we also have conventions and treaties that you must work within to make sure that they are safe. They are very safe. Get it from me. Thank you, Betty.
They are very safe, you say. I would like to ask about the ethical boundaries when it comes to such technology. Are there any, and how do you ensure that, let's say, people with evil motives do not, you know, take advantage of this?
Because one, there is peer review. A process that happens. That's why you publish. We want to get to know what this person is also publishing. We can know whether they have ulterior motive, number one. Number two, there is also the trust in scientists. And, there are also registration to professional bodies. There, WHO is watching. National Biosafety Authority is watching. There in EU, there's EFSA are watching. In the US, the FDA is also there watching. And we are supposed to be giving step-by-step accountability of everything that we do in the lab. That is why they come routinely to check what we are doing in the lab. But also, just to alleviate your fear, Betty, is that, you know, the fact that a knife has been used to stab another person cannot make you ban the utility of a knife in the kitchen.
That is true.
What we only do is we put laws that when you use a knife, instead of chopping a skuma wiki and you use it to chop somebody else, we arrest you and you go to jail. So even here, if you contravene these laws that are governing our operations in the lab, you are also liable for imprisonment. So we also have those regulations. So my thinking here would be, let's not be overly paranoid, thinking, hi, this is, you know, not regulated. It is very regulated. And we haven't seen any. Get me the examples of any Kenyan scientist who has been this, you know, this naughty. So sometimes it's good to be a little cautious, but sometimes a lot of caution really would also make us not really get to the intended objective of technology. And it is so sad, because as we are still debating, it's interesting. When you go to US, almost soybean and almost 70% of most of the foods are already GM. I would want to see people actually refusing to go to the US because of the fear of GM. They don't even, or carry. I would want to see a lot of luggage with food, that enough for them to eat when they're in the US until they come back. Because it's allowed. When they go to South Africa, I want to see this. And in this country, actually in Africa now, we are at a point where we have 11 countries really actively engaging in this technology, and 7 of those countries actually have commercialized. We have South Africa, we have Kenya now, we have Ethiopia, we have Sudan, that is, we have Malawi down there, Eswatini, and Nigeria on the other end. All this, and Nigeria account for a quarter of the population of Africa. So if 1 in 4 persons you see is supposed to be a Nigerian, because if there are almost 200 and we are talking about 800 million to a billion people in Africa, that's a quarter of the population. If they have gone this direction, in 2019 they actually approved cowpea. They are enjoying it, and they were the first country in the world actually to export genetically modified cowpea. They are reaping billions. Here we are still cautious. Sudan, when we were banning in 2012, because they have done it for the last 10 years, their BT cotton is up. Their industries of textile industry has been revitalized heavily. And we are still here discussing, 10 years later with the ban, and cancer is still here. That was the reason why there was a ban. And for the 10 years that we have not even eaten anything cancerous, have we had babies with cancer? Have we had cases of cancer in the country? So the panic was right then, but it cannot be for 10 years.
Okay.
It is just too much of waiting.
Kenya's agriculture sector is affected by very many challenges right now, starting from the diseases and pests to climate change issues that are impacting Kenya and the region really quite hard. Do you think that the GMO technology is the way to go in terms of sorting out these issues?
It will help them a great deal. One, look at the data. In Iswetini, they used to actually spray 8 times per season. Now it has been reduced to 3. What does that do? It saves the environment, because when you're spraying, you're throwing in chemicals in the environment, and also saves them money. If you look at in Sudan, 150,000 farmers are now active growers of GM crops. If you look at almost the 2.1 million hectares of land that is growing GMO crops in South Africa, and in 2018 alone, they reaped 237 million USD just down here, and it's an African country. You sometimes wonder what really we are doing. Now, this is what it does. In the lab at Kenyatta University, where I was the head for several years before becoming the director of research, we do so many crops that we are trying to improve against environmental constraints. For instance, I was working on drought-tolerant maize. And drought-tolerant maize, drought is big, especially in the face of climate change. And what is funny, Betty, is that in science, things are possible. We don't synthesize these things in the lab. We pick them from already existing germplasm. I can give you an example. If you go to Mandera or Northeastern, you will find it's drought, it's desert sort of, right? But when you look keenly, you can find sisal growing, isn't it? Why is sisal growing and maize cannot grow? Yet sisal is also a plant. So what we do, and this I'm just giving an example, I go into the genome of the sisal, identify, sometimes you'll realize it's the root that is longer, so it gets some water down there, or the leaves of sisal, you'll find it has very shiny cuticle, it reflects back the heat, and therefore very little is absorbed. Sometimes it's the succulence that you see on the leaves. So what do? I go pick those 3 genes, one for root elongation, one for cuticle, so that even the leaves of maize, when it is heat, it reflects back the heat so that little is affected. Then I transfer them into maize. How bad can that get? Root elongation. So that is just an example. But if, the unfortunate bit, and this is what I keep challenging the public, is that we are also very rigid in what we eat. We are very rigid, and if you are able to start enjoying sisal soup, we wouldn't bother. Yeah, you see how you're looking. Yeah, sisal soup. We wouldn't bother because it's existing in the drought environment. That's what my analogies say. So if we can also keep moving, because let me tell you the trick or the reality is that the world, nature always provides something. Even if there is drought, there are sisal, cactus, and all of they are growing. So just change and start eating them. Then you leave maize until the time when maize can grow. But we are also very rigid. So that means that we are now given a challenge as scientists. What do you do to the maize that the farmers now don't want? They want to uproot them. We come with solutions. So drought is one of it. Cassava, for instance, the cassava, there are those cassava, you have heard of cases where kids have died because of eating cassava that are bitter. That is cyanide inside cassava. And interestingly, the kind of cassava that has those cyanides are usually very big and look very juicy, only that they have the cyanide. Why? Ask yourself why. It's because cassava itself actually doesn't want to be eaten. It's a defense mechanism for survival. Plants do it. So it is their defense mechanism so that they are not very palatable, so that they're eaten a lot more, because that has an effect in terms of their survival. Now what do? the process of producing this bitterness is somewhere. I'm a biochemist. My undergraduate degree was in biochemistry, so I understand this pathway. There is a pathway we call Linnamarin Pathway. It is the pathway that eventually leads to the production of this bitter thing. Now, in genetic engineering, what I do is I go to the genome. It's a cytochrome P450. I just silence that so that it doesn't produce that bitterness. Then we are good to go. It has been done here, and my colleague, Dr. Matthew Pierongugi, actually did that, and we have cassava that has less cyanide, a cyanogenic, that is how we call it. We already have it in the lab here at Kenyatta University. If you look around Striga, where my colleague, Professor Steve Runo, actually is deep in it, you will find that he has actually realized that Striga is, it's a weed, and it is parasitizing maize. What it does, it brings its root and attaches it into the root of maize. Now it waits for the maize to make all the nutrients as it sucks. It doesn't do now the photosynthesis once it has sucked that. And that is why we are saying, how do we stop it? There are mechanisms of how to make sure that it doesn't even germinate, because its germination is also triggered by some chemicals which the maize itself produces when they don't have phosphorus. Those things can be done through the process of genetic engineering. And even as we are talking about genetic engineering, Betty, now we moved from the transgenics, which was moving, say, from sisal to maize. We went to what we are calling cisgenic, meaning we just activate the genes themselves of maize itself, or from the same species. Now we are in what we are calling genome editing. Genome editing, now I won't go anywhere. It is just in your own system. I don't go anywhere. Just get the guide RNA, manipulate what I want to manipulate so that you are able to survive. So, and it is that one, it's not even genetic modification now, because your genes keep changing. If you look at how the evolution, genes keep changing depending, or keep getting expressed depending on the environment. That is why if you go into a colder environment, you'll find fellow human beings who are wazungus don't wear t-shirts, and it is cold. You go there and you wear your t-shirt, you're just like, whoa, you're freezing. Why? And we are both human beings. We have the same genes. It's because their adoption, they have already adopted, and also a bit of expression profiles, which are different depending on how the environment is. And people get to do this. So instead of, we are now learning that there's so much that we have not actually known in the genome of many of these germplasm, and therefore by genome editing you can trigger something that was previously just calm in there for purposes of helping. If we trigger, and that's why the lab is there, if we trigger and find that this has actually made it shorter, then we just stop it at that point. So, and we allow technology to happen. The safest way to go to Mombasa from here, Betty, is by walking. And by the way, let me surprise you, that when the first car was actually made, there was somebody walking in front of it with a bell actually ringing, telling people that something very dangerous is coming your way. And imagine if he is walking in front of it, then it must be slower than the person walking. But it was there. Look at the kind of perception and the risks. Now we are here with the fastest vehicles, and we still move on. And also another analogy, Betty, the plane is the safest mode of transport, apparently. But when something happens to the plane, the survival rate is almost zero, because there's nowhere to park the plane up there, right? Yet, when we are leaving the airport, and you have traveled repeatedly, have you heard those cabin crews saying that, ladies and gentlemen, probability of us reaching Mombasa is 50%? No. Why? It's because the process of making a plane to the point of it now flying is so stringent that when it goes through that process, please spare us the details of 50% or not. And that is what we are also saying. The process of actually producing GMO, 15 years of just stringency, they are the most regulated products in the world. Once it goes out, please eat it. It is okay.
It is safe.
It is safe.
That is the message here.
Yes.
Well, I don't think it would be prudent to end this conversation without discussing funding of research in Kenya. I mean, you head research at Kenyatta University.
Yes.
Could you just, we know that research is highly underfunded in Kenya.
That's correct.
And you're saying that it's supposed to solve very many issues that we have, not only in agriculture, but, across the board. So could you speak about the funding situation of research in Kenya?
That's one of the reasons why the ban should be lifted. Why? Because donors, a lot of research actually we undertake from good proposals that colleagues write and scholars do write for submission to international donors, Bill and Melinda Gates, World Bank. You talk about most of this USAID. Those are international donors and our development partners probably. Now the challenge is, if the ban is still there, actually those donors are asking us very hard questions right now. That how come that you still are asking for money for research, really, in this area, yet there is a ban? You see, this is hypocrisy. We cannot, and therefore we are seeing, regrettably, the funding for biotech going down, and this is not very good for our country. And also, I must say though that the government tried through NRF. We have received a number of funding from National Research Fund, but it's not enough. The government can do more and can allocate that 2% that was supposed to be allocated to research would do wonders in this country, really. And I don't know why we don't learn. Countries that have made significant progress in their development really also have given research a lot of budget. Why? Because you can only develop through innovation. So for me, I feel very strongly that the government should increase or just uphold the 2% allocation for research. If they do that and it's allocated adequately in priority areas, we are good to go as a country. Why is it important, Betty, for this ban to be lifted? And this is just pretty quickly. One, it's because this ban is affecting the students that we are graduating from our universities. Remember, we are training them on BSc Biotechnology. Genetic engineering is part of the courses that we train. And now you have been there for 4 years and you go out and you can't practice the thing that you've been actually trained for 4 years in the university. Why? Because there is a ban. So they are asking us very hard questions. And remember, this is a course that has been approved by QUE, Commission for University Education. The Senate has already passed and the QE has also accepted the curriculum. HELB also funds them to come and do these courses, so that is still taxpayers' money. And then once they have done all these things, and they pay a salary also to teach the things that they have banned, and we are not in jail, you can see a lot of hypocrisy and all this. So from where I sit, let's do the one right thing as a government. We've done 50% by allowing commercialization. Let's go ahead and lift it so that we can benefit even in the importation, because the problem with lack of a ban on importation, the feed, animal feed, there is crazy crisis right now out there in the market, because some of the formulation, the kind of the content, the nutritional contents that the item that they're using for this formulation are imported than the GMO. Now soybean is a very critical component in the animal feed. It's 90%, 100% GMO. Now you've stopped that importation. These guys cannot actually benefit from that, and that's why the prices of our animal feed is rising, and this has a direct impact on us. Yes.
You've mentioned the issue of the animal feeds, and
yes.
we were going to get to that. Animal feeds in Kenya right now are very expensive, and to bring the cost down, farmers are looking at importing GMO animal feeds. The government right now, through the Ministry of Agriculture, is looking at allowing the importation of, is it more than 99% non-GMO? That is to increase the GMO capability, the GMO components of the animal feed importation. Do you think this will sail?
They are even late as a government. Instead of actually still wasting time thinking that we want to do partial, lifting of the ban. By the way, just lift the ban. And once you lift the ban, there are so many things. Because honestly, I ask this question: if you have already allowed, commercialization of BT maize, or BT cotton, BT maize, and cassava is also coming, really. So what is it? why wouldn't you want, to allow importation, unless the discussion is about controlling the competition from other countries, so that we can develop our own? If that is the thinking, then that's a discussion for another day, and I think it can open up another discussion. If it's for purposes of locking it so that the local farmers can produce theirs and therefore we build our economy, well, that's a discussion that economists will really find very interesting. But for me, my claim or my plea right now is lift the ban so that the manufacturers who are deep in food, animal feed and food and feed industry can actually get the right raw material that they need to help them develop and manufacture animal feed. It is critical and it is high. What does that do? If animal feed is high, then this means the cost of milk will go up. The cost of other foods that are from animal derivative, animal products will go up. And we all live, unless we feed on chicken are here, eggs. We are talking about pigs are here for our pork and bacon and all these things. And now we cannot import the raw materials that are very critical for the formulation of these products. It is unfortunate. So my plea, and I keep saying this, let the government lift the ban. It will increase the research fund. It will reduce the cost of animal feed. It will make us actually import other food GMO derivatives that are important in agribusiness for producing some formulation. Even our brothers and sisters who are living with HIV, 90% of some of the food formulation that they require for their survival actually are laced with GM products, soybean. And that's the case. Canola, which is, a GMO for oil. Right now, oil prices have gone higher. And we have, GMO, oil from canola. So it's a thing that was good then to protect the country because there was a publication, the fake publication, but it cannot take us as a country 10 years to lift something that your neighboring country, say Sudan, actually approved at that point. Ethiopia is up here approved. So where are we heading? And by the way, Kenya is a central country for the region. Now, when Kenya actually brought in this ban, Tanzanians, you can imagine, they were saying, hey, if wenzetu wa Kenya have put a ban on this, let's watch. The Ugandans were saying, hey, hang on, we are here. But at the end of it all, we are lucky, we are happy that at least now Uganda has already at a good level in terms of biosafety framework. Tanzania also is making progress, baby steps. Mozambique is around there. Burkina Faso is on it. Niger is talking very nicely around the biosafety frameworks. And these are very good things to report about, and the landscape is changing. In 2018, we had only 3 countries. Now in 2022, we have 7. And 4 more are about to come on board. So this is not a bad thing, really, for the continent. And we really would want this to be escalated and probably form part of even the harmonization within the East Africa community. Because one of the things that are actually slowing the adoption a lot more in our neighboring country is because we all, these countries have their unique biosafety laws that are not allowing. So there is need for harmonization of these biosafety laws so that there could be free movement of also goods around the region. Then we are good to go.
Yeah. You've talked quite a lot about how GMO is safe and all that. I'm curious, what is the scientific community and even other stakeholders in this sector? What are you doing to remove this notion in people that GMOs are unsafe? The actual steps that you're taking.
That's a good question, Betty, really. Part of the reason why it took us long to start to break this down is the very nature of a scientist. For a long time, we have been in the lab, and many of us, if they sit on this seat where I'm sitting right now, might find it very difficult to break it down to the layman's, because I'm really struggling now to make sure that the public really understands this, because the language is different in the lab. And scientists, we are taught, and our familiarization is on making sure that we do what we do best quietly and in the lab, in a language that only fellow scientists understand. Now, what we have done is that there is an organization, for instance, that I chair called Kenya University Kubiko Kenya University Biotechnology Consortium. I'm the chair of that organization. It was formed in 2014 because when we realized that there was a ban and nobody was speaking about it, and we are the scientists in here, what this organization does is to advocate for safe use of biotechnology and also to advocate for it in the scientists themselves, to say, hey, we are here and we know what this thing is, and we want to say that it is safe in ABCD, and please watch ABCD. For instance, even assuming right now, Betty, all of us scientists just say we are also tired of pushing for something that you guys don't believe in. Let's go and do matatu business or do other things because we can. Then we leave this country just like that. Who will be here to actually even verify when the bad GMO is coming? We still need a lot, and that's why I keep saying this government needs to invest even very heavily in this technology. Even if you don't want it, please invest and invest so that you are able even to protect these so-called risks, to protect your people against this risk, because they are not there. So we need to be here and to be given sufficient funding to make sure that we are still able to protect this very, very country. For your information, we have National Biosafety Authority. The CEO, the previous CEO, the inaugural CEO was a doctor. The second one, Professor Goy, was a professor. Now the current one, Roy Mugira, is a doctor. And everybody, they are experts in this area. So they know what to regulate and they know what not to, approve. So for me, it is important that we talk more as scientists, and I really am grateful that you've given us the opportunity even now to talk about this. Allow a lot more of better messaging, because the anti-technology, the anti-GMOs, they use very scary means of scaring people. When somebody touches on your fertility and your potency, you can imagine that they tell you take GMO, you won't give birth. That's a very serious claim, and we don't do that. We are a bit modest. We tell them no, the science says so, and we are almost thinking that we also would want to go bare knuckles now and tell them no, tell us, let's go to prove, go to the lab, tell us what exactly, why are you saying it brings cancer? And yes, cancer is here and we are without the GMO. Okay, so we scientists must speak a lot more, and have open discussions with, say, key stakeholders, including even parliamentarians, to make laws that would be very conducive for the implementation and the adoption of this technology. Right. It is a good technology. It's
a good technology.
Yes, it is.
In just 30 seconds, Prof, I'll give you 30 seconds to give us your closing remarks.
My closing remark is that approved genetically modified crops or foods are safe.
Okay.
Don't be worried. As a country, we have all the necessary infrastructure to make sure that we protect this country in terms of regulation, capacity, and even ability to do research on it.
Right.
And may we as a country lift the ban.
May we as a country lift the ban. Well, that is the message here from Professor Richard Oduor, the Research Director at Kenyatta University, and we have been talking about GMOs, where we are at as a country in terms of lifting the ban, and also what it could do for the country's economy and food security. This is BizCheck. We take a quick break. When we come back, a conversation on business process outsourcing. Do stay with Channel 1.